Hey everybody, this is going to be a series of training videos discussing um, working in InDesign. Now, in order to work in InDesign, we are going to be and cover the topics that I wanted to cover to give you a cursory understanding of some of the basic concepts and elements of InDesign. We're going to create this basic two-page spread. Now, this is a two-page facing spread, which means that as we look at our layout, we see page 1, page 2, and they're facing. Now, as you may or may not know, normally whenever you create a multiple page spread or a multiple page uh, production, page 1 will usually be on a page by itself. If we open and look at our pages box, page 1 will sometimes be on a page by itself, and then page 2 and 3, as you see right here, will be facing, and then so forth and so on. So we're going to create actually one that is just page, in this case 2 and 3. We're going to have an image of our nice good little puppy dog here, and then do a little bit of work with text and images to create this simple but somewhat nice layout. Okay, so in the course of doing this, we'll talk about using images, using text, and some of the other elements that you see here. So to begin with, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the elements that we have working in this design. Now, this is the print preview of this design. If I wanted to see the design preview, I could just simply hit the word or the letter W to see all the work that I've got going into this. Now, you can see that I've got a 3-column layout, which is good for the right page, page 3 here. Unnecessary for the left, since I have an image that covers the entire left page. The columns here, the columns that I've got created are simply there to create a guide frame to be used to lay out text. Now I have some things called a thing called an inset in here that I can use to pull out specific pieces of information. For example, if I have a quote that says "I love the good little puppy dog" in one part of my text, I might want to pull that out and just emphasize that with an inset. I also have some word wrapping around some images like this dog bone. But the original dog bone, as we'll talk about here in a moment, is certainly the entire dog bone. Um, so we'll have to talk about how we can work with that. And you'll notice that I don't see the entire dog bone. This article, now you can see this is placeholder text, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll just assume that this is an article about maybe this dog that's gotten into this paint. This is a continuing article, which means that it starts here and then continues just from one column to the next. We also have a header or a headline that covers our entire body text as well as some of the photo. Now you'll see that the O actually seems to encroach on the photo. We'll talk about how to make that happen. I've also got this nice paint element with a certain amount of transparency, so it looks as if it kind of fades into the background. It doesn't it's not obtrusive in this design. So we'll talk about how to make all of that stuff happen as well. Okay. All right, so to get into this, let's talk about how to set up a basic two-page spread to begin with. Okay. First, we'll go to File, New, Document. Now, here we have all of our options for two-page spread. We can decide what our width and height is, width being the measurement across the bottom of the page, height being across the side, so how tall it is. We also want to make sure that we are using the correct unit. Now, a lot of students tend to get, or a lot of designers when they start out, may get rushed and choose the wrong unit increment when they start, and things never quite work the way they expect. we want to make sure we spend the appropriate amount of time in this screen making sure that all of our elements are correct. In this case, we're going to use inches. 8.5 by 11. How many pages? Well, we're doing a 2-page spread, so we want 2 pages. We want them to be facing pages, so we want them to face across from each other, not just standalone pages. And then we want them to start on page 2. Okay? Moving down, we will start with 3 columns. This has all been prepared beforehand, so this is a basic gutter of 0.1667 inches. And then margins. The average printer that is not a commercial printer, or I would say a professional printer rather, can print up to 1/4 inch from the top, bottom, or sides of the page. They cannot print closer than 1/4 inch to the side. So what we want to do is create margins that accommodate that 1/4 inch. Now, if we wanted to do more than that, what we could do is change that to maybe a half or a full inch. But the trick in all of this desktop publishing or design is to try and efficiently and effectively use the space that we have to the best of our ability. Now, I'll call your attention to this link here on the right. As long as this link is turned on, if we change one of these elements, so 0.5, all the other elements change as well. Change that back to 0.25, and everything else changes to 0.25 as well. So once we have all of this set correctly, we can hit Create, and now we have a 2-page spread. Let's talk about what we have on this. So if we go up here to the top right, you'll see the option for pages. Now, as we build, if we hit more, new, you can see that I continue building pages after this. If I scrolled up, I could actually see all my different pages. So I'm in 6, 7, I'm in 4 and 5, I'm in 2 and 3. I could actually go in and move these pages as well if I wanted to. So reorganize the pages any way I choose in this menu, or rather tool panel. Okay. I also could delete any pages I don't need. So I just went ahead and highlighted the ones I wanted by holding Shift and selecting them, and then I hit the trash can icon down there at the bottom of the panel. Alright, so I've got my 2 facing pages. Facing meaning they are attached and they would face each other, and you could fold them down the middle essentially. These vertical panels are called columns. The margins would be the space outside these pink boxes. The gutters would be the space in between the columns, right here, 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 and here. So margins, columns, and gutters, just so that you understand these terms. Okay? Alright, so these are the basic elements that you need to understand in creating pages. Now, we're going to start and probably finish this first tutorial with just basically discussing how to put in a basic image. Okay? So, if you'll recall in our first design, what we're trying to design, we have this image of the dog on the left page. It takes up the entire left page. Well, we're going to work with that. We're going to do that. Now, in InDesign, we don't want to copy and paste. We don't want to drag and drop. What we want to do is called placing. We want to place elements from a folder that has all of our raw images in it, possibly more than one folder. But we want to place elements into our documents from wherever they are originally into our working document. We can do this by going to File and Place. The shortcut, Command D. Once we click this, and I'm going to go in and find my, where is it? InDesign example. Here that is. Okay. Let's see, is this the dog? Yes, it is. Perfect. There's the dog. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. Once I find that one, I hit open, and you'll notice how it's attached to my mouse. Now, if this is attached to my mouse, this gives me the opportunity to decide where I want to put it and how large I want to put it, or how large I want to make it. So if I went in and just made a very small box, the dog would be very small. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. If I went in and made a very large box, the dog would be very large. Now, we've got a bit of an issue here, because if you'll notice, the dog is actually a horizontal photo. So on a vertical page, it's not going to fill the whole page like what we see right here, or rather it's going to encroach on the other page. So what we need to do is actually work with our page and our photo in a very specific sort of way. And it's very important to understand how InDesign does this. So what I want to do is this. We're going to create a box that's roughly the same size as the pink box area on the first page. Okay, it's a little bit bigger. I can see it's encroaching down here at the bottom, but that's okay. Now, we're outside the margins. We're encroaching on this other page, but we can actually work with this. The important thing to understand is this. In every image that you put on a page, there are two parts. There is the frame, which you see right now. This is the blue box. You'll see the blue box around the edge. There is also the image itself, which if I move this over, you can see the orange box. Now, I'm going to show you what I did here. Zoom back out. Okay. All right. If I move into my image and grab this circle, you can see that the frame, the blue box, stays exactly where I had it originally. But the image that appears inside that blue box can be moved around in a variety of ways. This is kind of like looking through a window. So for example, if I looked through a very narrow window and I saw a tree on the other side of that window, what I see through the window doesn't represent the entire tree. It just represents what I can see through that window. Now, if I stood up or looked down out of that window, I would certainly be able to see more of that image. Same thing goes with our InDesign program. Okay, so why is this important to you? Well, this is important because as we design, and I just deleted the dog, Command D, find the dog again, and I'm going to create another box that's roughly, again, the size that I need it to be. As I create this image in the place and the size that I want it to be, what I can do is reshape essentially the frame, the window, to exactly the size that I want it to be. Now you'll notice the image isn't changing. In other words, the tree outside the window doesn't change. It's just the window that I'm looking through. I can still move the image inside the window, up, down. I can even resize that image any way I want to, in the same way that I would in Photoshop. So if I held Shift, notice how it locks the image proportions in place. So it constrains the proportions if I held Shift. So I can reposition that image any way I want to within that frame. I could also go in and resize that frame even more if I wanted to. I'm going to hit Command Z to put it back. If I wanted to move both of these, so for example, resize and reshape both the frame and the dog, instead of using the selection tool, what I could do is the free transform tool. This would give me the ability then to reshape and resize both the dog and the frame at the exact same time. But that's sometimes not as helpful to us as just being able to do one and then the other. So that's fairly helpful. The other thing we can look at is if I go in and I found the dog bone. Now, you'll notice I've got two dog bones. I've got the JPEG and the PSD. The JPEG version, if I went in and I'm just going to put it over here, drop it off, you'll notice the JPEG has the white background. If I come in and place the PSD, I'm going to click off of this so it's not selected anymore, and now I'll place the PSD. If I drop the PSD, you'll notice in the PSD version, the Photoshop version, I have removed the background, so it's just the dog bone without the background, without the white background. Essentially, all I did was I went in and created a file that had no background. So you'd have to refer back to Photoshop to remember how to do that. But essentially, it just created a Photoshop file with a transparent background. It has no background whatsoever. We can do the same thing we did with the dog here, but if you'll notice, in our two-page spread, I only had part of the dog bone. Well, with this, if I wanted to, I could grab that bottom frame, drag it up, and actually cut off the part of the dog bone that I don't want to use. So if I wanted to bring it in, drag it off, drop it where I wanted it to be, that's how we would accomplish the effect that you're seeing here. Okay? Alright, one more thing with images in this video. Done the same thing with the color splash. So, I've got the color splash. Done the same thing with the Photoshop, taken out the background. But if I put it in, it's very vibrant, it's very rich. You can see that it's pretty bright. Well, if I go in and I use the free transform controls, shrink it down to about the size that I want it to be. I can always change it later, but we're going to go about that size. Okay. Now, if I want it to fade into the background, there's several different ways I can do this, but the easiest way would be to adjust the transparency. That's this tool right here. Now, this is actually called opacity. Opacity is how visible it is. At 100% opaque, it is 100% visible. If I move this down to 0, it is 0% opaque. It was 0 visibility. So, by adjusting the opacity, I can adjust how visible it is on the page. So, this creates that sort of faded image that we're working with right there. Now, I'm just creating what's already on our page, but you could play around with this and do some very cool things by adjusting these different elements. Okay? Alright, we're going to stop this video here. I would suggest that you play with images and see what you can do with it. There's all sorts of fun things that can be done with images.